And welcome to Lone Star Yell Fight, where your favorite Aggie, Andy Tom Chesson, and your favorite Longhorn, James Christopher, take you deep inside the two flagship programs of Texas football.
Soft. You're so sweet. I love you so much. Oh, me too.
And we're back here with another Lone Star Yell Fight. And yes, we began the episode with that very classic rivalry week. Can't even say that right. Rivalry week episode from ESPN. Michigan, Ohio State making out. Andy, I always thought it'd be funny if they had like an A&M Longhorn version of that very same sketch. I thought it could have been funny and really fit us as much as anything else. Maybe more so, actually.
I am certain that there will be plenty of marketing opportunities for ESPN beginning, I don't know, July 1st.
You're probably right. I just always felt like that commercial, there's way more house divided with Longhorn and Aggies than I'm sure there are Michigan, Ohio State. But
I don't know. They probably all reside in West Virginia.
They probably do. And
East Coast bias is real.
Yeah, true. We're also excited to welcome our favorite LSU Tiger, Brian Arbor. You've seen him on Go Astros, onto the show. Because really and truly, gentlemen, for this being rivalry week, again, can't say the word, I don't have a rivalry game to get excited about. You guys do. It's turned into one of the...
You're playing Texas Tech, son.
Yeah, that's
Aren't
true.
you? Are you having to go to Lubbock?
We are not having to go to Lubbock. They are coming here.
Okay. Well, we at least have
for a while. Texas had it arranged where everyone just came here, and then I guess Longhorn people were like, "We'd like to go somewhere else for Thanksgiving every now and again." So maybe switch it up. Guys, what do you guys see? Like, to me, even though Texas is banged up, I thought last week's win against Iowa State was closer than the score. I mean, bigger than the score was because they had the 2 touchdowns called back to penalty. But and I was able to watch the game after leaving Harry Potter and the Cursed Child at intermission. So there's my review for you guys going to see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Anything I should be looking out for, because I am concerned about any of the possible opponents in the Big 12 championship. Texas cannot be as sloppy against those teams as they have been so far. Andy?
I have not. I'll be fully one to admit I have not caught up, but I thought the last I saw it's going to be Oklahoma State. Is that not right anymore?
It's more than likely Oklahoma State. There's still some
lots of scenarios.
Yeah.
Even Texas hasn't sealed its spot yet,
Yeah, I mean, Texas will get one of the 2 spots. I would be wary of Oklahoma State because I think Gundy will be able to put together a solid game plan. But ultimately, you guys win that game or lose that game based on you, not necessarily who you're playing. If you, as Texas has done a number of times this season, I don't think I'm saying anything that we don't know about, decide to play 1 quarter of a game or just half a game and then take the rest of the game off, there's a situation where they could be in trouble. It'll be up to Sark to keep that team, get them prepared to open hot and keep them at that level for the entire game. And if they do that, there's really nobody in the Big 12 that's going to be able to beat them for 4 quarters. It's, to me, again, does Quinn Ewers start off slow? Do you take a while to realize you can run the ball on any opponent in the conference?
Right.
All the things that we've talked about this year. And so far, none of them have come back to bite Sark and the club. See.
Speaking of things Texas do well, Brian, the Texas defense last week against Iowa State gave up 9 rushing yards on, I think, 18 carries. That seems pretty good.
It is. And in general, I thought Texas, the win at Iowa State was sort of the culmination of Texas has played as a much more mature team this year. As Andy says, they've had, quarters and halves and parts of games where they've sort of disappeared, but they've never let any of that get away from themselves. They went into not the easiest road environment. There'll be tougher ones. See you next year on that one.
Right.
But, a type of thing that has tripped up Texas teams before. And, they never got themselves in trouble in this game. They were, able to, again, it wasn't a huge, impressive win, but in the context of where Texas has been over the last decade, it's an impressive win.
Yeah, nice to get hit 10 wins, which they haven't done in a really long time. So that was obviously a lot of fun. And hopefully, Andy, next week on the show, we'll be talking about them going to the Big 12 championship game. But we actually do have what I think has turned out to be a really fun rivalry in college football, and that is LSU Texas A&M. And already, I mean, this thing has only been going for what, 10 or 15 years, Andy? Is that about right? And you've already had some classic games, including the game where the NCAA changed the rules, because I loved that whole 7 overtime thing, and I'm so disappointed that they have essentially cut the knees off of that. But Brian, we'll start with you. LSU's defense has really kind of just been okay. So what are you looking for in this game that you think LSU is going to be able to do well, that they're going to have to make sure they continue to do well to beat the Aggies?
Score a lot of points. Because, as you say, LSU's defense has been not an LSU defense. This is particularly true at cornerback, where LSU's cornerbacks looks like they're Mississippi State's cornerbacks all season. And there's been issues and attrition as part of that, but just in general, they've never had, LSU for years has always had a great cornerback who is going to be a high NFL draft pick, and they have none of that this year. And so what they do have instead is 2 of the best 10, possibly 5 receivers in the country, and the best player in the country in Jaden Daniels. They've scored a ton of points pretty much all season, including in their losses. And so, hey, how does LSU win? They score 45 points. And Andy, you tell me, are the Aggies capable of scoring 45 points with Connor Wegman?
Before we get to Andy's answer on that, I would point out they might not need to, because the Aggie defense has played really, really well at times over the year. Andy, you can answer Brian's question, of course, but also who is playing quarterback this week for the Aggies?
Jalen Henderson, 3rd string quarterback. I mean, there is a world, I guess, where Max Johnson comes back, but it's going to take one shot to the ribs to put him right back on the bench. And I don't know what the benefit to him outside of pride and ego and all those kind of fun things getting on the field. This series, it's not just the last 12 years that these two teams have played 54 times, 56 times over the course of history, first played in 1914. So this was an ongoing thing for a while, and then it stopped in the mid-90s and picked up back again when we joined the SEC. The last 6 have been split evenly, and the home team has won each of those 6 games. And that's, what we have to thank Jimbo for, I guess. So he cracked the code on beating LSU a little bit. This is a game on paper that we should not win. I don't think that we can score enough points to stay in a boat race with LSU, especially with Daniels at quarterback. I agree with Brian. He's probably not going to win the Heisman, but he is the best player in college football. Having said that, if I'm going to find a chance for A&M to win somewhere in the weeds here, I am not picking on anybody when I say this, but LSU possibly has the worst defense I've seen from a Power 5 football team in a really, really long time. They don't seem to be able to stop the run, and when they do manage to stop the run, you can pass all day on them. Unfortunately, that doesn't really play into what A&M can do well right now, which, we can't really pass downfield. Our defense is solid, and I would say of the teams that LSU has faced so far this year, with Alabama and Florida State being the top 2 defenses that LSU has faced, A&M's probably in that group, in that conversation. But what we don't do well is defend the downfield pass. And that's what Daniels does extremely well. I think we hold Daniels to under his weekly average in rush yards, because he runs the ball really, really well. But I think he's going to pass all day on us. But again, if there's a chance, our defense stops up and it becomes a 31-28 type game, which would not be, unheard of in this series.
I want to stay with Andy for a second, and then Brian will follow up. One of the surprising stats has been A&M's road losing streak. And then now you're gonna match that from going into Death Valley, one of the most sort of intense home field environments out there. What can you? I mean, how do you rationalize the streak that A&M has been on? And you know it's going to end at some point, but it does seem just perplexing that this has been their situation.
I mean, I think ultimately some of it is a coin flip.
Yeah,
we could have beat Ole Miss 3 weeks ago in Oxford. That could have happened.
You've
Some of
also
it,
played, to be fair, played some neutral site games against Arkansas that you won.
yeah, some of it is just ultimately I think it comes down to Jimbo and his lack of preparation or his type of preparation. I don't want to say lack. I think the thing we're going to look back and see with the Jimbo Fisher era is this is not a situation where he got a big payday and just decided to quit. I think if anything, he tried too hard and kept doubling down on what he knows, what he knew how to win. And it's just not realistic in college football in 2023. For as far as the road streak, there's been a lot of bad luck. There's been a lot of close games. A lot of those games have been by one score or one possession, sometimes less than a touchdown. I don't think that's going to be the situation in Baton Rouge this week. It's just there's a lot of regret. One of the weird things Jimbo liked to do is travel on Thursdays instead of Fridays, and he backed into the academic excuse. Well, the new interim coach, we're traveling Friday this week. Maybe that makes a difference. Most teams travel on Friday for a Saturday game. But outside of that, it's just it'll eventually happen. But ultimately, it's a lack of a combination of a bunch of things. But I think it's Jimbo Fisher had a very distinct way of wanting to approach things, and they didn't always work out, and that's one of them.
Brian, I want you to talk a little bit about Death Valley, because we were talking at dinner about just so you growing up in the area, all your family went there. The Longhorns, for better or worse, don't have the reputation of having the most intense home environment. I think we're called T-SIPs for a reason, not just beyond the irritating reason why, but I do think that we are a more passive crowd. As my wife notwithstanding is maybe the most fired up Longhorn student I'd ever met. But what's the difference, or why is it so crazy at LSU that we don't see that at UT?
So two things. And I went to grad school at the University of Texas and had season tickets back in the Vince Young era. So I certainly saw lots of really good Texas football. But I certainly
went to school together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I could have been your TA and hopefully not failed you. No,
I rocked that shit actually.
In film school.
Well, fair. I got 2 degrees, buddy. I also got a history degree because I'm smart with something to fall back on. Oh, woof.
2 differences. One is LSU is a big tailgating culture. And tailgating is a euphemism for, hey, there's lots of cooking and lots of, good Cajun stuff, but that's a euphemism for drinking all day.
Uh-huh.
LSU's fan base is much drunker than, we would argue anybody. It's rivalry week, which for LSU, we say our true rival is sobriety, and we've never beaten them.
I mean, to that point, you have to worry in some environments about the fans. West Virginia burns couches, and there's a lot of meth use. OU, there's a lot of meth use. LSU, and I will say from a rivalry standpoint, they will give you all levels of grief when you go to Baton Rouge, but they will also feed you a bowl of gumbo.
Yeah.
Get you drunk with them. And there is outside the stadium a lot more camaraderie. Inside the stadium, you're definitely taking your life in your own hands if you show up in something other than purple and gold, because there are bottles thrown. Another thing that A&M
and Bear Bryant said the difference between LSU and the other SEC schools, the bottles are always empty.
That's true, which we appreciate. It's a little bit lighter. If there is another thing A&M has going for him this week is that, to Brian's point, this is a fan base that has all day to get ready for these night games, which are historic and legendary in Death Valley. We're playing at 11 a.m. Saturday morning. So you're going to be recovering from the night before a little bit. You're just going to have to drink all the way through the evening. And knowing that your team has 3 losses already, it's going to be a slightly more subdued crowd than if they had a chance to reach the SEC championship with this win, or if they had already clinched it.
We're saying 2019 when we wanted revenge for the 7 overtime game, and
right,
A&M putting that on their rings.
We gotta have something.
Shots fired. I will say this too. I had a similar experience, Andy, at College Station every time I went, where lots of razzing, but lots of getting fed at the tailgate. I had a t-shirt with Reveille with no feet, and it said "saw 'em off," and they couldn't get enough of that shirt. So I'm looking forward to that element of this rivalry coming back. You guys mentioned something. LSU has 3 losses. A&M has also 3, right? Or is it 4?
Four losses.
Neither team going to the SEC championship. And one of the things that really bugs me about where we're heading with college football is it's becoming a real all or nothing zero-sum game, where if you're not making the playoff, then your season was a waste, and mileage may vary on that. But why is it important, that you win? And I want you to also both talk a little bit about the bowl game, and obviously Andy will get to this more, but do you project a lot of players on both squads to say, you know what, I'm making a business decision and I'm not playing in the bowl game, because that's a thing now? But yeah, Andy, talk to me a little bit about that, about just why does this game matter?
Well, because 8-4 is better than 7-5 ultimately. It matters because the interim coach is still technically being considered to be the head coach for next year. And so you'd like to see how he plans for a game, how he manages his coordinators.
Hey,
how
got you a spot of the job, right?
Yeah, and how he takes advantage of what he can take advantage of.
Yeah.
I think it also goes a long way towards retaining players who are on the fence about staying or leaving. Because you do have an outside chance at 9 wins, and 9 wins with all the stuff that has happened this season. That's a technical term, by the way, stuff. That's not a bad thing. And that makes it a lot easier for whoever the next coach is to come in and say, you guys were this close and we can do these things to have an immediate improvement over those 4 losses. So it is important. It's not the end of the world if we don't lose. We've already fired our head coach. You can't do much more than that. And, there is some weird hope that somehow Bobby Petrino is going to become 2007 Bobby Petrino this weekend, and not with a volleyball player, but with offense.
Brian, how about you from your end? I mean, what does
First of all, I went to that game, and Andy, I'm going to hate you forever for bringing that back up. 2, I watched the LSU Georgia State game last week as well. Somebody had to. And LSU's game plan in the red zone was, we're going to get it so Jaden Daniels scores all the touchdowns. There was no way they were running a halfback dive on the 1-yard line. It was very clearly we want to get Jaden Daniels as many touchdowns as possible so that he looks really good in the Heisman race. So LSU needs to win because they're pushing Jaden Daniels for Heisman. And that's something I think that, they want to be able to sell as a Brian Kelly Heisman for the future. So they have to win for that to happen. They probably need some other stuff to happen, like a 3-2 Pac-12 title game between those 2 contenders for the Heisman. So that's, I think, the first priority for LSU. The second is, a 10-win, their chances for a 10-win season. And to do that, they need to beat A&M, and they need to win the bowl game against probably a pretty good Big Ten team in a Florida Bowl. I'm not sure this would be entertaining, but LSU versus Iowa would be the best offense in the country versus the best defense. And then, good Lord, you have to watch the other two teams. You can just skip that part. It's a bowl game. It's an exhibition. Skip the LSU defense and the Iowa offense. They're just as ugly.
I will say this about LSU's offense. A lot was said about the 2019 national championship team and how good that offense was. I think in a lot of ways, this LSU offense is better. I think statistically, there's a lot of things that show that they're better, but you just watch them. I think Daniels is better than Burrows, and Burrows had a career season. The receivers are certainly better than what Burrows had to work with. And I think your O-line is a little bit better than that year was. And that's saying a lot because that 2018 or 2019 LSU offense was historically good. I think this one,
which Jim and the Longhorns know.
Yeah, this year, yeah,
but that still was a hell of a game,
overshadowed by a really, really bad defense. And it's not good.
Yeah.
It's so funny you brought up that game because while that game was happening, was hosting the award show for our film festival, and I had one guy signaling me the Longhorn score and the one guy signaling me the Astros score. The Astros got off the deck, and I think that was the Wade Miley game where he gave up like 8 runs and he get it out, and the Astros still won the game. Longhorns have cost, I think, lost by 2 in that high scoring affair. We make a lot, guys, on if your team struggles, but you get the bowl game, you get the bowl practices. A&M is likely to have a coach named but not in place. So does that still hold true, even though you're not going to be working on whatever new system you have and this and that to have those beneficial practices?
Well, yeah, because a new coaching staff could come in and run practices. They will very likely leave Elijah Robinson in place to coach that game,
Right.
because no head coach wants to necessarily walk into a bowl game and take that potential loss as the starting off point. I'm going to start fresh with the next season. But the practices, just from simple reps, if you're just going to do stuff like, this is how you block, which we struggle with on our offensive line. This is the guard's responsibility. That guy directly in front of him, that's his response. You're going to try to stop him from hitting your quarterback and crippling him. We need work on that, regardless of who the coaching staff is. I think it's also, if you keep these kids engaged, it's easier to get them to stay. If you didn't have these practices, then you're talking about this dead period of 2 months until February when you can start having meetings with your players again. It's a lot easier when you don't have that constant interaction with the coaches and everything else to have these kids make decisions to go elsewhere. And I fully expect no matter who the next coach is, we're going to have kids from this 2022 class that have decided they're going to go elsewhere. And honestly, especially on the offensive side, I really couldn't blame them. I think there are a couple names that we're looking at that could change that, but some guys are still going to have to do what's best for them, because you're entering your junior year. Yeah. That's your last year that you have to play college football for a lot of these guys. And they're going to want to maximize their exposure. And let's say you're a top flight wide receiver and we hire a guy who's known for running the ball. You're going to make that choice that highlights you. And love to keep all these kids. I don't pretend we're going to. And I don't blame anybody for wanting a better situation for themselves, which ultimately is what the transfer rule is about.
And Brian, your situation is different because Brian Kelly is still putting things in a lot of ways. So getting those 14 extra practices does matter.
Yeah, and Jaden Daniels is out of eligibility. I do expect him. Yes, it's hurt. I would expect him to opt out of the bowl game, which I'm okay with as an LSU fan, because we know our quarterback from next year is the backup quarterback. They were able to get him to stay. Serbier is the backup quarterback with the promise he'd be the quarterback in 2024. So putting him as first team guy for 10 bowl practices and for a bowl game is, I think, a useful step in the development. Could be the wide receivers also opt out. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas are eligible for the draft. They're going to be all SEC receivers. May move down to the next set of guys. So there's particular value to that as LSU looks to what the team's going to be next year when they don't have the top players on their offense back 2024.
I wanted to jump into some stuff before we do some predictions for tomorrow. But, as often happens, sports media jumps into some hyperbole. We talked about it on this show. Deion Sanders really began with this entire aura that he'd built around himself. But since then, the season has really fallen flat on his face. And you've noticed that it has, he's disappeared from the media almost entirely, unless it's an Aflac commercial. Brian, what were your kind of thoughts on the Deion experiment, and how does he contextualize this season, where I think he thought that they were going to be better? I think he at least thought they were going to be in a bowl game this year.
Yeah, so the first thing is Deion is a celebrity in a way that's, sort of entering the profession in a way that's different than even high-profile coaches like Jimbo Fisher or Brian Kelly are. And part of that is you see him so often on the commercials, and part of it is he brought in so much attention to the sport, particularly winning the first game of the season against TCU. So it's just different, right?
Yeah.
Than any other coach. Colorado's big problem is on the lines, particularly its offensive line. And so the issue for Deion Sanders as a coach, as a program manager, is can he develop some of his current players, or Deion's he went out and got a whole bunch of other players. Is he going to work the transfer portal to get himself a better offensive line? It's harder to get a good offensive line through the transfer portal, because again, how players work together and mesh together. The offensive lines are only as good as their weakest player, and obviously Colorado's got a lot of weak players on the offensive line.
Andy, he's right. I mean, we talk about it at Texas all the time, where they were getting all these high recruits on the offensive line, but they never meshed, they never gelled. But Deion has been pretty open about the fact that he's okay with changing 81 players a year. Does that spell success? And do you see him building on this, or do you think that this is the end of the Deion train?
I think there's a little bit of a gap in Deion Sanders' understanding, and I'll couch this a little bit. I think a lot of the things he's doing are good for Colorado and ultimately going to make them a competitive football team. I don't know that Colorado in the current world is ever going to be a true national championship contender, but I think they can be a solid 10-win type program. They have been in the past, just not in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that gets overlooked in the bluster of I'm turning this roster completely over is you can't turn a roster completely over. It's impossible for a team to mesh and gel that quickly. You see more of it in the NFL, but even NFL teams don't turn over 80% of their roster every year. You have to have some continuity, to Brian's point, on the offensive line. I think you have to have some continuity on your defensive line, and you have to have a quarterback who knows the system. The one piece that Sanders had this year was having a quarterback who knew what his coach wanted him to do, because it's his dad, and he's coached him for a while.
Yeah.
When you saw, especially when Shedeur went out, that was an entirely different team. I think the evolution of Deion Sanders as a coach has got to be this offensive line stays together for 2 years, and they work together, they grow together, they learn how to play together, because that makes everything else on the offense work on a consistent basis. The defense, maybe you can afford to be a little bit more mercenary, but he's going to have to evolve to the point of developing kids and not just dumping them when they don't meet his expectations. And there's a lot of the talk that he's still putting out there right now about, we'll just go get new players. That's great in theory, but it doesn't always work, because it does take kids time to get acclimated to a new offense, to a new defense, to the altitude in Boulder, Colorado, to a number of things.
Wheat as illegal wheat.
Well, I mean, there is a value in continuity. Yeah, that continuity needs to be tied to talent, but when you start getting talent, you can't just shove them off because they have a bad game against Nebraska.
It's almost like letting Twitter run your program. Yeah, I think it's interesting, guys, because if we'd had this conversation in September and we knew the A&M job, there will be people out there talking about, prime time could go to A&M. But I think I don't know, Brian, I think he's years away from that.
Yeah, he has met the first step, right? Which is, it's rare for a 1AA coach, much less a coach from HBCU, to come to Division I, period. And then he has improved that program from what it was, which is much more of an indictment of where it was.
Sure.
Than what it is. But that's a first and important step. But he needs to keep building from there. I always thought, hiring Deion in Colorado was, hey, we've got to do something different and pretty radical, because if we do things the standard way, there's not enough football players in Colorado that we can recruit from that. And now we've got to go into, we got to go into California a bunch. We'll see how that shifts with the move back to the Big 12, where Texas recruiting is a big thing for them. But again, at the top, when I was in college, and Colorado was at the top of the football, they had great players from Texas like Alfred Williams. They had great players from California like Eric Bieniemy. It's much harder to recruit in those two places today than it was back then. One, because A&M and Texas are much better recruiters than they were back then. They had Cordell Stewart from Louisiana. LSU's better at recruiting Louisiana than it was. And then there's so many, hey, the first 2 picks in the NFL draft this year, C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young, both from California. And they didn't stay in California to play college football. They went much further west or much further east.
You know, Andy, he brought something up where is that going to be the downside of where we're heading in college football, where classic programs are going to have a much harder time clawing their way back to relevance? You know, because yeah, I mean, Colorado was in the Big 12 championship in 2005. They do have a history of national championships, but as we enter this new era, is a program like Colorado just not going to have the same opportunity or the same viability as schools like ours, or obviously the Alabamas and Ohio States of the world?
I mean, the having 12 teams in the playoffs starting next year certainly helps their odds, but I think there is very clearly a class of the Big Ten and the SEC, and then everybody else. And so, yeah, Colorado could compete for a Big 12 championship starting next year, and they could advance and make the playoffs. But the odds of them doing much in that playoff system don't seem that great to me looking at it on paper right now. Now, maybe that changes. Maybe there's a lot more parity that I'm, expecting to see. But the bulk of the talent that's being recruited in this country is still going to SEC schools and to Big Ten schools. And schools like Colorado, with some exceptions, are going to find themselves managing teams with what's left. So sure, Dion could be a great recruiter and get more Travis Hunters on his team, but does he have 15 Travis Hunters on his team? Because that's what Alabama has. That's what Georgia has. That's on offense. Well, really on the entire team, what LSU has. They just don't play them well on defense this year for whatever reason. And those Ohio State, Michigan, I mean, you can make a list of 12 teams that recruit lights out compared to everybody else. Texas is one of those teams. Ultimately, the talent is going to determine who wins these games. And do they make the tournament? Sure. Do they ever win the tournament? That's kind of where it's a mystery to me. And I don't see it a lot. But
big dogs are bigger in 2023 than they were 10, 20, or especially 30 or 40 years ago. And that's a challenge to Colorado and TCU and Wisconsin and Georgia Tech. Schools like that.
Every sort of bubble big school.
The last time Colorado won a national championship, they had to get an extra play to do it. Infamously.
I think the Gecko has part of that play.
They have got 5 downs.
Yeah.
And tied with legendary program Georgia Tech.
Yep.
You won the other half of that title.
And
you
we'll
would
have
think, honestly,
you
you would think if you said that today was the national championship matchup, you would assume that's a movie and the alumni were from Georgia Tech. That's the only way Georgia Tech is in that conversation ever again.
And we can debate in the offseason whether or not that's good for the game or bad for the game. And we are heading a direction that we're heading, and it's a direction that's logical, and whether or not it's going to ruin what we like so much about the sport or not does remain to be seen. So I guess we'll go around and get our predictions for Texas at Texas Tech, or sorry, Texas Tech at Texas this weekend. I got Texas by 17. Andy?
Tech is not even as good as they were last year. I think you win by 21 points. And I think Arch gets some reps.
Okay. That way before
35-17 Horns.
Sorry, Brian, I'm sorry.
35-17 Longhorns.
All right. Okay, so I'll go first on this A&M thing. Before we get to it, though, I'm going to give my prediction, and I want you to give one thing about the other team that scares you a little bit. I know you kind of touched on some of it, but I actually am going to call A&M breaking the road losing streak and squeaking out a last-minute win. I like the third-string quarterback. I feel like they're finally playing with some degree of energy on that side of the ball. So yeah, I'm not putting any money on it, but that's what I'm taking. But Brian, which one thing that scares you about A&M, and then your pick for the game?
And you can't say the yell leaders. You can't say the yell leaders or the cultish behavior.
There are many things that scare me about A&M that are jokes or be more serious topics than is appropriate here, but not the actual question. Blocking Walter Nolan. Despite the fact that I think we have a really good offensive line, one of the best in the country. two bookend tackles who are sophomores coming back next year who are really good and be the foundation of the team next year. He's the 5-star player on A&M who plays like a 5-star. So that'll be the biggest issue.
And what's your score prediction?
LSU 45, A&M 35.
Wow. Okay. A shootout. Andy,
That's all we play.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, the obvious answer is Jaden Daniels trying to make his last Heisman case. Should scare anybody that has to play him. He's an incredible quarterback, and like I said, he is the best college player this year. Probably won't win the Heisman because his team hasn't won enough, which that's a whole nother conversation that we could probably have because it seems to work that way in a lot of sports.
It really does.
Anyway, to me, the reason that Jaden Daniels is scary is because of his receivers, and there's 5 of them I could name that can beat you over the top, that run good routes, that can out physical your defensive backs, and that's where we're weakest on defense. So that's you can take your pick between any of those 5 players that I just mentioned. I don't think it's going to be quite as high scoring. I think it's probably more of a 35-21. Maybe we score a little bit more than that because, again, LSU's defense is really, really bad, but I don't know what we're going to get offensively. We struggled against Abilene Christian for a half because they dared to spy our running quarterback, and we took a while to figure that out. So I'm hoping that nobody gets hurt and that all the kids have fun and that everybody can, enjoy their Thanksgiving leftovers on that Saturday in relative peace and harmony.
I want to close with this one thought then, and this one, and I'll turn it over to you guys. What we've often seen, how many times have we seen it where coach gets fired, new coach comes in, inherits a team that he's able to connect with in a different way, and they immediately start fast. It seems to me like whoever A&M hires could be set up for that level of success. Brian, what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll close it out with Andy.
I see that point. I also see sort of it's more difficult to do that in the modern era of the transfer portal. Because again, the first thing you have to do, and Brian Kelly's talked about this at LSU, where he's going to stay there, is you have to retain your guys and keep them there. That is much harder for insert coach here because A, he's not there right now.
We used the analogy last week.
Some of these guys are making these decisions. And B, hi, nice to meet you. First time I've ever met you. Here's why you should stay here rather than go to everyone else who's in your phone calling you right now.
We made the comparison last week that Mac Brown said that was his first job was to recruit Ricky Williams. Like it's that kind of deal. But now you're going to do it to everybody.
Yeah, there's only when he did that, there was one player he had to keep it, only one player. Today, every single player has the option basically of going. And does Dion want me?
Let's be fair. Ricky Williams was helped out a lot from a baseball contract. Did he ever actually show up to play any Padres games?
I don't know. I'm efforting that information.
But there was NIL before there was NIL. Let's put it that way.
Researching right now.
I think a lot of it depends on who A&M ends up hiring. Like I said, I assume that we're going to lose players. It is slightly encouraging that when Jimbo Fisher was fired 2 weeks ago, that a 30-day window just automatically opened and only one player has announced their transfer. Now, that should be mitigated in your thought process a little bit by the fact that there's not a lot of coaches out there who are currently trying to get players onto their team because of playoff considerations and those kind of things. But it's something. We can hold on to that. And I'm not saying this is happening, but if your next head coach is Ryan Day because he loses to Michigan again and is just tired of Ohio State people harassing him in grocery stores, which they do, you retain the entire roster because he comes in with a reputation. You know what you're kind of going to get, even if you don't bring, his offensive coordinator with him. That's a name that's going to turn heads. If it's who I think it's going to be, and it's Jed Fish out of Arizona, that's a harder sell because it's an unknown. I think he's going to be a good coach, and I think he's going to be a good coach wherever his next stop is. But if you're Evan Stewart, do you want to find out how much he passes the ball? Are you going to give him the chance to try to sell you? I mean, there's that too. So it's interesting. I think if you can hold on to the majority of this roster, it is a little bit of a turnkey job because you can then focus on filling some holes from the transfer portal, and the recruiting class will come on because you're going to get some of that new coach bounce. But a lot of it's going to depend on who it is. I think if it's and thankfully Traylor has finally gotten the message that he's not going to be the coach.
Well,
But
I
if
want you to go into that real quick. That was my last thing to set up. Is can you talk a little bit about the trailer story and what
So
has been going on?
Jeff Traylor did interview, as I think is the right call. You want to cast a wide net, talk to people who are interested in the job. And then he started telling people that he was getting the job, including players that he's trying to recruit and possibly players on our current roster. And the problem with that is he is still a sitting head coach at another D1 school, which is technically illegal. I don't have proof of that. I just have coaching friends who know that has happened. But his tone has changed from not answering questions at all or being really vague with the media to last night on San Antonio, the Blitz radio program in San Antonio, basically saying, my wife loves it here. I love it here. I have no plans to ever leave. So something in the last 24 hours has changed for Traylor. And I'm guessing that is him being told that he's not getting the job. I think that Ross Bjork knows who he's hiring. I think there is still some things in the air about conference championships, because depending on who we're pursuing, even if it is Jed Fish in Arizona, there's a chance that he's playing in the Pac-12 championship in 2 weeks. So we're hoping for some clarity. I don't think we necessarily know who the coach is on Monday next week, but I do think that Ross Bjork is going to know who he's extended an offer to by Monday next week.
Brian, every time you hear the word Bjork, do you think of a mid-90s pop singer?
I assume he'll be in a swan dress while he makes the offer.
It's a lot more plaid sports coats than you would think.
You would think. Brian, any thoughts on that? What Andy's talking about, the Jeff Traylor thing? I mean, it seems like there's always going to be a little bit of impropriety going on in this sport, as there's always has been. Don't tell people that there's always been, but there has been.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, you really are recruited by and for coaches, right? It's the school matters, right? Hey, you want to major in business management or whatever, that matters. But in the end, are you comfortable with these coaches? Both, and of course, that dictates so much behavior, not just among the high school recruits, but also how and why. There is some coach on a Texas or LSU staff who is going to go to the NFL, and that will be announced the day after National Signing Day in February. Even though that's known well ahead of time, because again, the behavior gets dictated by that.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good place to leave it. I'm hoping that you're all leaving some leftovers off of your table for this weekend to be a good weekend of college football. Andy and I will be back next Friday, so 1 week from this Friday, to break down whether or not Texas is in the Big 12 championship and what the future of A&M looks like. But first things first, Brian, thanks so much for coming on. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
You're welcome. And I've looked this up. Ricky Williams played 170 minor league games. Slash line 211, 265, 261. So
signing bonus.
Andy, his team would have been better for him not to have shown up based on those. Should have just, but he seems to have made the right choice on which sport to pursue fully.
And he makes the right choice every time he passes the Dutchie to the left-hand side. This is James Christopher. That is Andy Tom Cheston. This is Lone Star Yell Fight. Man, you really teed me up for the pass the Dutchie comment.